Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back and joining me for Shabbat Chaverim this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your Shabbat lunch today, and as you probably know, it won't be long before, thank God, we're going to be back in the dining rooms again, and you'll be able to have your meals with friends instead of having to eat in your room, and that will make for a really nice Shabbat. So, I wanted to begin a discussion today about what is ahead of us over the next few months in the way of Jewish holidays and observances. And, there's kind of this not so inside joke about rabbis who have this very, very intense period of time in the fall, usually during the months of September and October, when it seems as if a significant number of Jewish holidays fall. And indeed, they do, starting with I, I don't really consider Tisha B'Av an observance that's part of the fall holidays, but it does come usually in August. So starting in late August, early September with Slichot, then going into, of course, Rosh Hashanah, Shabbat Shuvah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and then Simchat Torah. So we have this very concentrated group of holidays in a relatively short period of time. And of course, the famous conversation that we always have with people, let's talk about it after the holidays, or, I can't address it until Yom Kippur is over, or something like that. Because it is a very intense period of time, not just for rabbis, for the Jewish people in general. However, if you look at what we are about to embark on in the spring and going through the um, early summer, it is probably an even more intense period of time because of the number of holidays and observances and because of the variety of holidays and observances. Really, a very broad range of different types of things that we will be doing. So, just to give you a bit of a rundown, there are 9 upcoming holidays and Jewish observances that we are going to participate in between the 16th of March, just about 5 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, and the 6th of June. So that's 2.5 months. And I'm going to give you a brief rundown, and then I'm going to talk specifically about these over the next several sessions that we have together in both my Hi There programs as well as my Shabbat Chaverim programs. And I'm going to explain my methodology in a moment because we're not necessarily going to do them in the order in which they occur, but we're going to do them in groupings according to according to other specifics about the holidays, and that'll become evident shortly. So we begin with Purim, which this year falls on the 16th and 17th of March. It begins the evening of the 16th and actually goes through the 18th. The 18th being Shushan Purim, and I'll talk more about that when we get to the discussion on that holiday. Then in mid-April, of course, comes Pesach, with the first day on the 15th of April. And so the first Seder will be the night before and running for 7 or 8 days, depending upon your own particular minhag, your own particular custom. There are those who observe 7 days and those who observe 8 days, and we'll talk about both of those and why that is. On May 3rd is Yom HaZikaron, which is actually has in the Hebrew a much longer title. It's the Day of Remembrance for Soldiers and Martyrs, and is specifically a day of remembrance for those who perished in the various conflagrations for the liberation of the State of Israel, for the creation of the State of Israel, and so on. So we'll talk about how that holiday, not a holiday, that observance falls. Following immediately on the heels of Yom HaZikaron. Oh, I skipped one. I have to go back to the end of April. I apologize. The end of April, Yom HaShoah, and that is on April 27th this year. And of course, Yom HaShoah, which is the very, very somber day that commemorates the Shoah, the Holocaust, and how that is observed. And we'll talk about observance of that both within Israel as well as in the diaspora outside of Israel. Then we get to Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance, on May 3rd. Yom HaAtzmaut, immediately on the heels of Yom HaZikaron, is Israel Independence Day. And this will be is this year 75? No, this is year 74. Year 74. So I imagine next year will be a huge celebration, but this year is year 74. Following that, there is an observance known as Pesach Sheni, which falls exactly 1 month after Passover. And that is not for everybody. Pesach Sheni is a day of Passover observance for those who were unable to, for a number of valid reasons, to not observe Passover on the days on which it is specified. And that could be for reasons of illness, for reasons of travel, things of that nature. Then we have Lag BaOmer, which is the 33rd day following Passover, and we'll talk more about Lag BaOmer. And then we have a day at the end of May, May 28th this year, known as Yom Yerushalayim, which is a day which celebrates the city of Jerusalem and all that entails. And then finally, we get to Shavuot, the third of our pilgrimage festivals, one of the critical holidays in Jewish life and in the Jewish yearly cycle. So as you can see, we have between mid-March and the very beginning of June, a very, very heavy schedule of different holidays and observances coming up. Now, you might think that there is a hierarchy to these different holidays and festivals, and indeed there is. There are some that are considered more important, some that are considered to be major holidays, some which are considered to be minor holidays. We can also classify this grouping of, I think I said 9 or 10, into those which are biblical and those which are not biblical. And that will become more apparent as we go through these, because obviously the holidays that are those that mark specific events in the life of modern Israel are not written about in the Torah or in the Bible, because the modern state of Israel was not in existence yet. And therefore, those are observances that have been created specifically by those living in the modern state of Israel. And of course, many of them made holidays legally by the state of Israel, as we would do here, for example, with something like Martin Luther King Day, which was not an original observance in the United States of America, but has become one of course, in recent decades. So we have observances that are written directly about in the Torah that say you must observe this particular holiday on this particular date. And then it gives us very specific outlines as to how that holiday or that observance is to be done. We have others which are written about in the Bible, but are not considered major holidays. And for example, Purim would fall into that category because although Purim is a holiday that was created to commemorate a biblical event, the book of the book of Esther, of course, Megillat Esther, it is not on the same level as a Chag like Passover or Shavuot, which are written about in the Torah. So we have to distinguish here between two different categories, one known as Deoraita, which means from the writings or from the Torah itself, a specific set of rules and obligations that are incumbent upon us, versus Derabanan. And you hear the word rabbi in there, Derabanan, which is the way that an observance or a holiday is celebrated according to how the rabbis described it in the Talmud and so on and so forth. Okay. Then there is this third category, as I mentioned, of the modern holidays. So we have biblical that are prescribed. We have holidays that are considered minor holidays that are written about in the Bible, but are not on that same level as a Passover or a Shavuot. And then we have this third category of holidays and observances, which are modern in nature, that came about following a specific historic event or something to do with the land of Israel itself. So, how is it that I am going to address all of these in the next 3 or 4 sessions that I have with you, with Shabbat Chaverim and with Chai There with Rabbi Leah? Well, I've decided to do it in these categories as opposed to doing it in the order in which they're going to fall, because I think it will make more sense that way. So I'm not going to be starting with Purim, which is the first of these celebrations or observances. And even though Passover falls about a month after Purim, I'm not going to talk about Passover first. I'm going to address some of these more modern holidays and observances that came about as a result of the creation of the State of Israel, and why we celebrate, how we celebrate, or how we observe, because of course a day like Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and Yom HaShoah are not celebrations, they are observances. So you would, of course, never wish somebody a happy Yom HaShoah or a happy Yom HaZikaron. It just would not make sense. Any more than it makes sense to wish somebody a happy Memorial Day, which in this country seems to be the sentiment for a lot of people, because in this country, Memorial Day, although for many does involve going to cemeteries, honoring the war dead, and so on and so forth, it is also a day on which we have picnics and barbecues and parades and sales in department stores, and that's not something that you would see in Israel on a Memorial Day. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the more recently created holidays and observances, and by recent, I mean within the last 75 years. since the creation of the State of Israel. And then I'm going to move on to some of the other holidays and observances that are seen as major and are biblical in nature. Okay, so now you kind of understand how this is all going to happen. And we're going to start with Yom HaShoah, because Yom HaShoah is the first of these more recently created observances. The official name for Yom HaShoah is Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, which means Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day. And it's known colloquially in Israel, and of course outside of Israel, as Yom HaShoah, and in the English, Holocaust Remembrance Day or Holocaust Day. Now, I should stop for just a minute and let you know that there is a distinct difference between Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, and the Holocaust Memorial Day that we just finished observing in late January. That day is a even more modern invention that came from the UN. And it is observed, I believe the date is January 27th. I may be wrong, so don't hold me to that. Is the day on which Auschwitz-Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the Allied troops. So that is an entirely different sort of observance than is Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah comes directly out of a mandate from the State of Israel that a specific day be chosen, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. And it is a day which specifically commemorates those who were victims of the Holocaust, of the Shoah. The United Nations Observance Day is more in honor of those troops who went in and liberated camps. And the date was chosen specifically because it was the day on which Auschwitz was liberated. Not an unimportant day, of course, but a different focus. I'm going to be talking about Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day as it is, or Holocaust Remembrance Day as it is observed specifically by Jews, for Jews, as well as others who may want to remember, but specifically for the victims of the Holocaust. It is Israel's day of commemoration for the approximately 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust by Nazi Germany and by Nazi Germany's collaborators, and also in memory of the Jewish resistance that took place during that period. In Israel, it is a national Memorial Day. So there is not one corner of the land, and I don't want to call it corners because it's not necessarily square or rectangular, but there's not one place in Israel where this day is not being observed. The first official commemoration took place in 1951. So we're talking about 71 years ago. That was the first official commemoration. But the observance of the day was actually not anchored into law until 1959, which is when the Knesset finally passed a law establishing Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura as the specific day legally to commemorate the Shoah. So as you can see by the difference in years, 1951 to 1959, this commemoration took place for 8 years prior to it being enacted into law by the Knesset in 1959. It is held on the 27th of the month of Nisan, which is which falls usually in April or May of the secular calendar. So Pesach is the 15th of Nisan, so it falls within a couple of weeks after Pesach. It goes by the Hebrew date, 27th of Nisan, so it could fall on a different secular date every year, depending upon how the Hebrew calendar falls. And unless that particular day, the 27th of Nisan, falls on a Shabbat, in which case it is shifted by a day. So it's not going to be held on a Saturday. It would be held probably on the Sunday after, so on the 28th of Nisan. Okay, so just a couple of things. It is, as I mentioned, a Jewish national holiday. That means that all flags are lowered to half staff. Public places of entertainment are closed. You can't go see a movie. You're not going to go see a play. There is a national opening ceremony, and there are closing ceremonies, and there is a siren that takes place at 10 o'clock in the morning. And that signals the official start, and it is a siren which goes for 2 minutes. And I think that many of you, in fact, most of you, have probably either heard that siren in an audio tape or seen a video of what happens in Israel when that siren goes off, because it is literally the siren and no other sound. All traffic stops, comes to a grinding halt, whether it's on a highway, a freeway, or a side street, or a little crowded street in the Mea Shearim. Traffic stops, comes to a dead standstill. People get out of their cars, people get out of buses, people get out of taxi cabs, including the drivers, and stand at attention for 2 solid minutes while that siren is going off as a sign of respect. And don't forget that there are still many, many people in Israel in particular who are either themselves survivors of the Shoah or children or grandchildren of survivors of the Shoah, because this is, as far as human history is concerned, it is still modern history, of course. And in light of what has been taking place in the world as of late, with the horrific increase in anti-Semitism throughout the world, but particularly what we're seeing here in the United States, Yom HaShoah will take on more significance depending upon what else is taking place in the world at any given point in time. So the holiday, like not the holiday, but the memorial starts at sundown the night before. The official ceremonial start is at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 27th of Nisan. This year, 2022, Yom HaShoah starts at sunset on April 27th, so it's easy to remember because it's the 27th of Nisan, and it's April 27th, and it ends that night at sundown. Okay, so the first Holocaust Remembrance Day, as I mentioned, took place in Israel on December 28th, 1949. And that was as a result of a decision of the chief rabbinate of Israel that there should be some sort of an annual memorial that takes place on the 10th of Tevet. So initially, it was not the 27th of Nisan, it was the 10th of Tevet, which is a traditional day of mourning and fasting in the Hebrew calendar. So that was fine, except that if you are going to have a national commemoration on a traditional day of mourning in the Hebrew calendar, that means that you're not going to be able to do other things. For example, have national memorial services that require that people are driving to cemeteries and so on, because it is a fast day. The 10th of Tevet is a fast day. And on fast days, similar to Yom Kippur, it is like a Shabbat, even though if it doesn't necessarily fall on a Saturday, it is considered like a Shabbat. So you are not driving, and there are many activities in which you are not participating if it is a fast day. So when it was originally implemented by the rabbinate in Israel, the day was marked by the burial in a Jerusalem cemetery of ashes and bones of thousands of Jews who had been brought from the Flossenburg concentration camp, and religious ceremonies were held in order to honor the victims. Now, I'm talking about the first one that took place in December of 1949. There was a radio program on the Holocaust that was broadcast in the evening after the fast was over. And then the following year, in December of 1950, that was when the rabbinate and organizations of former European Jewish communities and the Israel Defense Forces held memorial ceremonies around the country. And they mostly involved funerals. And funerals not of individuals who had just died, but funerals that involved the burial of desecrated objects, such as Torah scrolls, such as prayer books, and things of that nature, as well as the bones and ashes of the dead that had been brought from Europe, and those were interred on that day. So then the Knesset, the governing body of the state of Israel, declared a specific date. And in 1951, the Knesset began these deliberations to choose a date. And finally, in April of 1951, after also considering possibilities like the 10th of Tevet, the 14th of Nisan, which is the day before Passover, who really wants to have a memorial like this on the day before Passover when everybody is still cleaning their houses and trying to get ready for the holiday? And the day on which the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising took place, which was April 19th, 1943, that was when the uprising began. They also considered September 1st, which was the day on which, the official date on which the Second World War began. So the Knesset was considering all of these different days, and they settled on establishing the 27th of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar, which is a week after Passover, 8 days before Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. And they said that is going to be the official date for Holocaust Memorial Day, and also commemorating the ghetto uprising, which was a significant day also in the Jewish calendar. So on May 3rd, 1951, that was the first officially recognized Holocaust Remembrance Day. And there was an event that was held at the Chamber of the Holocaust on Mount Zion. The Israel Postal Service issued a special commemorative envelope on that day. There was a bronze statue of Mordechai Anielewicz, who was the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. And that statue was unveiled at Yad Mordechai, which is a commemorative site in memory of him, and also a kibbutz that was named for him. And that's where this bronze statue was unveiled. And so from that year, and then the following year, the lighting of 6 beacons in memory of the 6 million Jews who had been murdered by the Nazis became a standard feature, so to speak, of the official commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day. And I'm trying to remember where it is that those beacons are lit, and I don't recall. So you'll have to forgive me for that, but there are 6 beacons lit. And as you know, in many synagogues and many communities that have an official Holocaust memorial service, it is customary to light 6 memorial lamps, 6 yard-side lights in memory of the 6 million. So on April 8th of 1959, the Knesset officially established the day when it passed a law called Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day. And the purpose of that law was to initiate an annual commemoration of the disaster which the Nazis and their collaborators had brought upon the Jewish people, and then also to commemorate the acts of heroism and revolt that were performed on either on behalf of the Jewish people by others or by the Jewish people themselves. And that law was signed by Prime Minister of Israel, the first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, and the President of Israel at the time, whose name was Yitzhak Ben-Zvi. And it established that the day would be observed, so right from the beginning, by a 2-minute silence when all work came to a halt throughout the entire country, memorial gatherings, and commemorative events that would be in public and in educational institutions, and that those would be held specifically as a way of educating those about the Holocaust. Of course, the flags are going to come down to half staff, and programs relevant to the day would be presented on radio and in places of entertainment. So movie theaters, and so on would not be showing movies for entertainment, but those places would be used for educational programs. And then there was an amendment to the law in 1961 that mandated that all cafes, restaurants, and clubs also be closed on that day. So let me just look here. I have a notation. Yes, so that took place in April of 1959, April 8th of 1959. So there were a few more restrictions enacted. Now, this is, as you know, not a biblical holiday because the Holocaust happened many hundreds of years, in fact, many millennia after the Bible was written. However, it is seen as a national day of mourning. And although it is not seen as on the same level as a fast day, such as Yom Kippur, or some of the other many fast days in the Hebrew calendar, it is for example, Tisha B'Av, it is nevertheless seen as a solemn day. And so I think it would be very unusual for anybody to have a wedding on that day. It's a day that is just avoided for any sort of frivolity, even though that is not a religious mandate or a biblical mandate. It is a state mandate. Of course, the state can't prohibit somebody from having a wedding or a party on that day. But if clubs and other venues are closed, it might make it more difficult. So in Israel, as I said, the day is the 27th of Nisan. So that's going to vary according to our own secular Gregorian calendar. If the 27th of Nisan falls on a Friday, because most observant Jews, of course, are going to be preparing for Shabbat on a Friday, it will be moved back to Thursday. And or if it falls on the Saturday, it will be moved to Sunday. So it will never fall on a Shabbat. And that is not going to take place this year or next year, but the 27th of Nisan does fall on Shabbat, falls on the Sabbath in 2024. And so that will be moved to Sunday in 2024. The most of the programming and the observance starts the night before at sundown. There's a state ceremony that is held in Warsaw Ghetto Square, which is at Yad Vashem, and I would imagine that most of you who've been to Israel have, of course, been to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum Memorial in Israel, in Jerusalem. And that is hosted, so to speak, by Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Authority in Jerusalem. And during that ceremony, the national flag is lowered to half-staff. So that kind of symbolizes the very beginning of this solemn day. The president and the prime minister are both there. They both deliver speeches. Holocaust survivors light the 6 torches. That's where the 6 torches are, at Yad Vashem, symbolizing the approximately 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. And the chief rabbis recite prayers. So there is a component by the secular government, which is the president and the prime minister, supposedly secular government. There is participation by those who are Holocaust survivors, who will light the 6 beacons, the torches, and then the chief rabbis representing the religious component of the state of Israel will recite prayers. In the daytime on Yom HaShoah, there are, of course, ceremonies and services that are held at schools and military bases and by other public and community organizations. And on the eve of Yom HaShoah itself, and the day itself, so that means not Erev Yom HaShoah, but Yom HaShoah, as I mentioned, the places of public entertainment are closed. Israeli television and radio will air Holocaust documentaries and Holocaust-related talk shows. Low-key songs are played on the radio, so you're not going to be able to turn on, celebratory type music. All the flags on public buildings come down to half staff. And at 10 o'clock, of course, we have this air raid siren throughout the country, and Israelis are expected to observe 2 minutes of solemn reflection. Now, almost everybody stops, as I said, what they're doing, including motorists who stop their cars in the middle of the road, stand next to their vehicles in silence as the siren is sounded. And I know that friends of mine who are Israeli will, at that moment in time, not necessarily 10 o'clock Israeli time, which could be quite early here, for example, in the United States, because we are anywhere from 6 to 8 to 9 hours in time difference because of the time zones. But I do have friends, and I do know people who will, at 10 o'clock in the morning, wherever they are, stand, lower their heads, and observe 2 minutes of absolute silence in solidarity and in remembrance of this horrific shame of the Holocaust. So Jewish communities and individuals around the world will commemorate Yom HaShoah. We have, of course, programs in synagogues. We do something here at Seacrest. I have for the last number of years. God willing, I'm going to be able to do it live this year in our synagogue. I am hoping and praying that we're able to do that. I don't see why we shouldn't be able to. Some communities will hold their commemorations on the Sunday closest to Yom HaShoah, simply because it is a more practical day for people to attend than on a weekday, or possibly in the middle of the week. Some people mark the day on April 19th, which is the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And Jewish schools, both day schools and secondary religious schools or affiliated religious schools, those affiliated with synagogues and so on, will also hold Holocaust-related educational programs on or near Yom HaShoah, not necessarily on the day itself, but on a day on which they hope that much of the community can be available for this very, very important commemoration. So I'm going to stop there for now. I'll continue a little bit with Yom HaShoah, just finish it up, and then I'm going to go on to clumping together the next grouping of holidays, which will be Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, and Yom Yerushalayim. We're going to look at those three holidays as kind of a grouping. That will take place when I do my next Hi There with Rabbi Leah, which is not this coming week, but next week. And then the following Shabbat Chaverim, I'll begin to tackle Purim and then Pesach. So, and then finally Shavuot. So we're doing these out of the order in which they fall in the calendar, but I think it's going to make more sense to group together the modern holidays with the biblical holidays, because the reasoning for them and the focus and the importance and the way in which they're observed is so very different. So I could have done this a number of ways. That's the way I chose to do it. I hope that's okay with you. Thank you again for joining me today. Enjoy the rest of your Shabbats. If you like to get outside, definitely get outside. And I am looking forward to seeing you all again in the dining rooms for blessings. God willing, hopefully in our synagogue again for community services. I'm going to continue this way for a little while until I get the thumbs up from the powers that be that we can go live in the synagogue. Have a wonderful day. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.